Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to begin. As my colleagues and students know here at the Hebrew Union College, when Zola's at the podium, we always start right on time. And first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives, located here on the historic Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. I always like to ask, are there any folks here, besides our guests of honor, who are visiting this campus for the very first time? If you put your hand up, let me know. Well, welcome. We're very happy to have you here. And I'm going to introduce the individual who put his hand up here in just a moment. There are several people in the room whom I would like to recognize, including our students and members of the faculty. I'm not going to, for sake of time, go through the long list of people who are here who are special friends of our college, but I do want to take a minute to do one or two quick items. First of all, I want to introduce the Dean of the Cincinnati campus, Dr. Jonathan Hecht, right here. Now, is Lisa still in the room? Good. So before we get started, and I'm speaking especially now to my future colleagues, I think everybody in this room knows that it's impossible to do any kind of program, have any kind of activity, unless there are people who are helping and supporting. It looks so easy to step to the microphone and have everything upstairs ready for our reception and then for the program, and everything's in its place. I know this may shock everyone. I don't do this all myself. There are a lot of people who are helping. And so the first and foremost, I really want to express my gratitude to someone with whom I've worked now for 34 years, and that's Lisa Frankel. So thank you, Lisa. And before we actually begin, I do want to take a minute. We happen to have here the full complement of the American Jewish Archives staff. Lisa, don't go away. Benjamin is just fine. I want those who serve us every day and make it possible for researchers from all over the world, both in person and electronically and by telephone and every other medium, who take care of the records of the Jewish people of the United States of America here in Cincinnati. I'd like to ask them to please rise, and we can express our thanks to you for what you do. So we have to begin because we're being live streamed. So want to welcome all those who happen to be watching this around the globe. Friends, 72 years ago, little more than 2 years after the end of World War II, an article appeared in the New York Times announcing the establishment in Cincinnati of a United States Jewish Archives. The president of the Hebrew Union College informed the public that the distinguished Jewish historian, Jacob Rader Marcus, would serve as the founding director of the fledgling Archival Center. Now, by 1947, Jacob Marcus had already emerged as a distinguished Jewish historian. During the first 2 decades of his career, he had published 3 major historical volumes: The Rise and Destiny of German Jewry, The Jew in the Medieval World, and Communal Sick Care in the German Ghetto. Yet, as Marcus observed the unfolding tragedy that befell European Jewry in the late 1930s, his interest in preserving and promulgating the history of Jewish life in America intensified. And he spent the rest of his long and active life dedicated to this same task. And the Archival Research Center that he established, and which he led for nearly a half-century, has today become the world's largest catalog collection of documentary evidence on the history of Jewish life on the American shores. And Marcus spent his entire scholarly career, nearly a half-century, reconstructing the history of Jewish life in this nation. He produced more than 300 books and articles on Jewish life in the United States, and contemporary scholars still rely on Dr. Marcus's work. And as a result of these achievements, Marcus was known and is still today referred to in some publications as the Dean of American Jewish Historians. Now, over the past quarter century, the American Jewish Archives has chosen to honor a select number of scholars and benefactors who have made extraordinary contributions to the study of the American Jewish experience by conferring an award that carries our founder's name. And this evening, the Marcus Center takes pride in welcoming and saluting two remarkable individuals, two outstanding philanthropists whose vision and largesse deserve our recognition and admiration: Shira and Jay Ruderman. Jay Ruderman is the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation, which is headquartered in Boston and Israel. He's a lawyer by profession, but really has devoted most of his professional career to deepening the relationship between the United States and the State of Israel. Before becoming the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation, Jay served as a deputy director of AIPAC in New England. In 2005, Jay enlisted in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and worked also there as a liaison, helping to establish bonds between Israel and diaspora Jewry. Now, in reflecting on his role as president of the Ruderman Family Foundation, Jay acknowledged that his own vision has been shaped by the values he learned from his late father. Quote, "My overriding goal has always been to take my father's vision and maximize the impact we can achieve in Israel and the Jewish community to make our society inclusive for all." And Shira serves as the executive director of the Ruderman Family Foundation. Like her partner in life, Shira is a social activist who's dedicated also to the ideals of inclusion. She's been completely dedicated to strengthening the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community. So together, Shira and Jay have guided this foundation, and they've done so in accordance with their Jewish ethical heritage. And this has led them to have the foundation focus strategically on two primary concerns. First, advocating and advancing for the inclusion of people with disabilities throughout society. And second, to strengthening the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community. Now, friends, time constraints make it impossible for me to itemize the many remarkable initiatives that have been undertaken as a result of the work that Jay and Shira have been doing through that foundation. But I urge you to visit the foundation's website, where you yourselves can really see the impressive array of interesting projects and programs that focus on these two aspects, primary aspects of the foundation's mission. But this evening, the American Jewish Archives takes pride and pleasure in recognizing but one of the Rudermans' most remarkable achievements, and that is the establishment of an MA program in American Jewish Studies at Haifa University in Haifa, Israel. It is, friends, the first and the only such graduate program in the entire state of Israel. Now, the Ruderman MA program for American Jewish Studies at Haifa University says that it aspires to educate Israeli leaders to understand what it means to be a Jewish American, and in doing so, thereby improving the communication and the understanding that is needed to deepen and to strengthen the relationship between the people of Israel and the United States of America. At the opening ceremonies for this program back in 2013 in Haifa, the ambassador to Israel from the United States, my former camper, Daniel Shapiro, underscored the significance of creating such a graduate program of advanced study on the American Jewish experience for Israelis. And he said these words: "The American Jewish population is deeply woven into the American social and political fabric. The stories of the Jewish diaspora are also at the core of the American story." Now, I have had the opportunity myself to serve as a visiting professor in the Ruderman MA program, and I see that my colleague from the University of Cincinnati, Dr. Rader, who is here this evening, I know he has also served as a visiting scholar at the program, teaching there. And there is no doubt that the graduates of this MA program possess a much more sophisticated understanding of the American Jewish experience because of their program at Haifa. So the Marcus Center takes pride in working together with the Ruderman program in Haifa. Over the past 6 or 7 years, the AJA has awarded fellowship grants to 6 of the program's outstanding students, and they've come here for a month of study to deepen their interest in the American Jewish experience. And several members of the faculty. See, I was supposed to begin by reminding you to turn off your phone, so my phone reminded me to tell you to turn off the phone. So, yeah, I'm going to hold on to AOL until it comes back into style. So as I was saying, you know, we work together, and in fact, we have here in Cincinnati a joint PhD program with the University of Cincinnati and the graduate school, the Pines Graduate School of Hebrew Union College. This joint program is also in collaboration with Haifa University and the Ruderman program. And we had hoped that Professor Gur Al-Roi, who is the director of the Ruderman program and is going to be a fellow here at the American Jewish Archives, would be here for this occasion, but because of the elections that are going on this evening, he felt his first duty was to be at home and vote. So, friends, those who entered this building this evening, I hope took note of the fact that you are confronted when you walk in this building with one of Dr. Marcus's most famous aphorisms. It's on the wall, and it says, "A people that is not conscious of its past has no assurance of a future." The good work that the Ruderman Family Foundation is doing to ensure that a new generation of Israelis will be conscious of the distinctive and significant history of Jewish life in America will, we believe, assure a better and brighter future for Jewish people everywhere. So the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of the American Jewish Archives takes sincere pleasure in recognizing your generosity and your contributions to our field of study by conferring today upon you the Jacob Rader Marcus Award for Outstanding Contributions to the Field of American Jewish History. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming and honoring Shira and Jay Ruderman to the American Jewish Archives.
Wow, I better do a good job after such an introduction. No pressure. Truly amazing, and thank you for these very, very kind words. Distinguished guests, panelists, and the director of the center. It is a pleasure to be here at the historic Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College. Jay and I are honored to be here tonight to receive the Jacob Rader Marcus Award from the American Jewish Archives. For decades, you have been at the forefront of preserving our communal identity and knowledge, and for that, we thank you for doing this important job. Most time, we do not appreciate enough the assets of collecting data and its potential impact, but you have it all. Paul Johnson once said, "Learning history is a powerful cure for modern ignorance and a source of humility, to see how our easy-to-follow, revolutionary, and compelling assumptions have been tried once before, but many times and in various forms, and found to be nothing but vanity." While we are honored to accept this award, we are even more pleased with what this award represents. This award highlights the need to strengthen the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community, but it doesn't do so by acknowledging something that is often forgotten. This is a two-way street relationship, and we wish to keep it strong and vibrant. It is important to educate Israelis about the life of Jews here, just as we must educate American Jews about life in Israel. It is our Jewish history together, no matter where we are. We do not do what we do at the foundation to get recognition or acknowledgement, although we greatly appreciate it. We do what we do because we consistently feel a lack of understanding between Israelis and American Jewry, and it turns its negative impact on the state of Israel and the Jewish people all over the world. There are many programs that educate Americans about Israel, but few that truly educate Israelis about Americans or American Jewry. The more work we do in this regard, the closer we can become as a global people. Yigal Allon once said that, with no idea of his past, his present, and his law on the future has been shrouded in mist. The Jewish people is a nation based on preservation of heritage, a legacy of meaningful life, and a legacy of education and of learning. With the book is a great expression, and the Jewish Archive symbolize these things. The archive is our book. He is the creator of our rich past, and a past that allows us to live significant present and plan a good future. And like the roots of a tree that allow it to high towards the sky, our past help us to build a better future. This is what our partnership at Haifa University is all about, and it's being led by Professor Gur Eloi. This is what he, the team, and the students are doing, strengthening their relationship. Yesterday in Tel Aviv, the alumni of this program network got together in the first time for the last 6 years. And it's a pre-Rosh Hashanah meeting, which we thought symbolized the night before the election, its importance to get them together and remind them why we're doing what we're doing together. It includes people from all fields of life, the civil service, business, and nonprofit sectors, media, Jewish organizations, and others. I assume they have many political disagreements and that many vote differently. However, they have one thing in common. They deeply care about the future of our relationship, the future about the State of Israel and American Jewry. Tonight's ceremony is about recognizing the importance of our common past, present, and future. We are truly honored to be here with you tonight, and thank you for all the work you do.
So, thank you. I wanted to echo Shira's remarks and just to give you maybe a snapshot of how this came about and why we did this, because as Gary mentioned, our background for decades is in disability rights. But I used to work for AIPAC, which many of you know is a political, pro-Israel political organization in Washington. And I had the chance to meet dozens and dozens of members of Knesset and ministers. And what I came away with was the feeling that they either were ignorant about the American Jewish community or didn't care. It was a non-factor. Now, today, we're finishing, and Shira and I, in addition to being Americans or Israeli citizens, we're finishing an election today in Israel. We don't know the outcome yet. I just looked on my phone right before we started. But, you know, we probably all have strong feelings about the prime minister. But despite that, he probably knows the American Jewish community as well as anyone in Israeli politics. He may be the next or continue to be the prime minister, or he may not. But I guarantee you the next prime minister will know very little about the American Jewish community. And the Jewish world, about 80% of the Jewish world is split between Israel and the United States. So for us, philanthropy is interesting when there's a vacuum. And there was a vacuum here. Because any discussion between American Jews and Israel is always about Israel. Threats from Gaza, from Iran, from Hezbollah. There's very little talk about the American Jewish community, who we are, how we organize, how we relate to each other. So we started to bring members of Knesset, and we brought dozens of members of Knesset to the United States to educate them on the American Jewish community, and journalists. And I'll give you one snapshot. Avi Dichter, who's now a member of Likud, but he's been a member of other parties, and he was the head of the Shin Bet, or the Shabbat in Israel, and he said to me, he's like, I've been to America 400 times, and I never knew anything about the community I was talking to until I came with you and learned for a week and shut my mouth and listened to the American Jewish community. So we are a vital community. I think we're vital to Israeli security, Israelis' future economically and strategically, but Israelis don't always understand that. So the establishment of the program in Haifa, the Rabbinate program in American Jewish Studies, was thanks to a really beautiful partnership that we've developed with Gor Elroi and the University of Haifa. And our goal is to educate the next generations of people who will become members of Knesset or will have pivotal positions in the Israeli society. And we're proud of the work that we've done. We didn't do it alone. We've done it with partners. But this award means so much to us. We do what we do because we feel like we're taking our own steps in trying to change society or our Jewish community. But to be recognized is very special, and I thank you very much.
So I opened up Tablet magazine today and was very happy to see an article. Now, I'm not putting my finger on the election scale. It's already in the oven. I can't do anything about it. But there's an article here about Yair Lapid. Okay, he's competing against Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the title of the article shows how prescient the Rudermans are, because it says, Yair Lapid wants to teach Israelis to understand American Jews. Will he get the chance? And he goes on, though, to tell a wonderful story, and I wanted to be, in presenting our present to the Rudermans, to just repeat the story. Apparently, he told this story at a meeting of the conservative rabbis in 2012, and he says that his father's, that is Lapid's father's name was Tommy, and Tommy Lapid came from the exact same village as Tom Lantos, the famous congressman from California, and that they knew each other as children, and he ends this tale by saying the following. He says that both survived the ghetto, and when the war ended, they metaphorically went to the same harbor, to different piers. One took the boat going to the right, one took the boat going to the left. One ended up in America, the other in Israel, where both left their marks in the political arena. And it could be easily have been the other way around. So he concludes, Lapid concludes, so every American Jew I look at, I think he could be me, and I could be him. And that, I think, summarizes the objective that you are trying to realize in this wonderful program. So there really is an award, friends, and it's right here. And we're actually going to make sure you get this by mail. We're not going to make you schlep this on a plane, but we hope you will. Let me tell you what this is. This is a personalized gift, and comes with the medal. But what we have here is a reproduction of a rare document that I think will have special meaning to you. Some people in this room may know that Theodore Herzl, in 1898, took 4 colleagues and went off to Jerusalem in the hopes of persuading the Kaiser that maybe the Kaiser would talk to his friend the Sultan, and he could persuade the Sultan to create a Jewish protectorate in Palestine. And evidently, Mr. Herzl, Dr. Herzl, and these five Jews who went together from Germany purchased a whole bunch of these postcards and then sent them to different people in the world, writing a little note about their experience with the Kaiser. Now, for years and years, we've had this in our collection, and the most valuable part about it is it's actually signed by Herzl, along with several others, including Wolfson, who succeeded Herzl. And it wasn't until recently, I always thought it probably came from a Zionist Congress. But recently, and you know, what you discover on the internet is, I'm looking on the internet, and I see that somebody's selling the same postcard, the exact same postcard, with the same 5 signatures, except they're in different order. So I'm thinking to myself, that's the same postcard we have at the American Jewish Archives. And I begin to do research on it, and that's when I realized that my assumption of where this postcard came from was completely wrong. That's why it has pictures of Jerusalem on it. That's why I should have thought it's postmarked Jerusalem. And so we took a picture of the 5 people which they took on the Holy Land, a little description of what I've just said, although much more elegantly and succinctly than I just said it, and a reproduction of the postcard plus the medal, and a tribute to the 2 of you. And I hope that in your office or wherever you'd like, you'll hang this and remember us fondly, and we have pride in you, and will be our continuing partnership in the years ahead. So. All right. Boy, I wish it were my honor to introduce our 2 guests tonight, but especially our distinguished alumna. But that honor is going to go to our partner in crime, who is co-sponsoring our program this evening, Dr. William Weitzer, the director of the Leo Baeck Institute in New York. So it is my pleasure and my privilege to welcome Dr. William Weitzer. I'm hesitating to say William because he always makes me call him Billy. And Dr. Weitzer serves, as I said, as the executive director of the Leo Baeck Institute. For those of you who don't know, the Leo Baeck Institute is a research library and archives that documents the history and culture of German-speaking Jewry, primarily in the 19th and 20th century. Dr. Weitzer will tell you a little bit more about that institution, which was founded in 1955 as a repository for the books and papers, photos, and documents that were salvaged from Central Europe after World War II. Dr. Weitzer has a long and very distinguished history in academia and served at Fairfield University, right, for nearly 3 decades before becoming the director. He's best known here at Hebrew Union College, though, as the partner of our faculty and distinguished colleague from New York campus, Dr. Lisa Grant, I should say now Rabbi Dr. Lisa Grant, who is Dr. Weitzer's spouse. And so you tell Lisa we asked about her, Billy. Billy is going to introduce our program. It's a great honor to have you and to be co-sponsoring this event. Billy, please come forward.
Thank you so much, Gary, and I'm very happy to be introduced as the partner of Rabbi Dr. Lisa Grant. That's especially here in Cincinnati. I'm really pleased to be here, and hope that you'll see how this first part of the program relates to the bridge that I'm going to build to our panelists, because it is all about, as Gary quoted earlier, being conscious of the past. And as he described, the Leo Baeck Institute is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history and culture of German-speaking Jewry. And that's such an important history, not just from the 1930s and 40s, but as I'll tell you briefly, a project that we're doing about 1,700 years of history in that part of the world, and what we can learn about Jewish history that will tell us about being Jews today, but also will speak to the migration issues that we have in the world and the tension between assimilation and identity. As Gary said, we were founded in 1955. I do want to briefly say that 3 Leo Baeck Institutes were founded, New York, and we now also have an office in Berlin. That's 1, London, and Jerusalem. And I want to acknowledge Professor Michael Meyer, who is here, who for many, many years led the LBI International that coordinated the work of our 3 organizations. And that work continues, but Michael's work was integral to making sure that the Institute's overlap was one that was coordinated well. And Michael also serves on our New York board. So I thank him for being here and being a big supporter and personally an advisor to me. Again, as Gary said, we do have a large archive. We're not here to have competing archives because the most important thing, if you have materials, if you know someone who has materials, it's that they be preserved. And I'm sorry to tell you that if it's in your attic or in your dresser, it's not being preserved, because humidity and warm weather are a danger to these materials. And especially when we're talking about materials from the 20th century. The people that lived the period that we're talking about, particularly the pre-Holocaust and then the Holocaust, those witnesses are going to be gone, and the materials are the evidence of what they went through, and we must preserve those. So no competition between Gary and me. If you've got the materials, bring them to one of us or to another archivist, and we'll get it put into the right place. But our work is much more than being an archive. We have the privilege, and it's really amazing, to be fully digitized, which is not done. Large archives with a lot of resources are too large to be digitized. Small archives don't have the resources. We had a donor who said we should be digitized. So we feel that we're at the cutting edge of what it means to archive in the digital age. And for example, in 2018, we took 365 digitized items, and each day in 2018, we released one of those items because they were from that date in 1938. It's called the 1938 Project. Please look it up online. You'll see how once archives hit the digital world, we have to figure out a way to mediate them, to curate them. And it was extremely well received both in the U.S. and in Germany. And our next project about keeping the past present is to celebrate a document that almost 1,700 years ago, in 321, was issued by Emperor Constantine that said the Jews of Cologne can hold public office. This is the oldest existing evidence of a Jewish community in that part of the world. And in 2021, in Germany, they're going to be celebrating 1,700 years of Jews in those lands. And it's an amazing thing. So what we're going to do, similar to the 365 objects, 365 stories, is we're going to pick 52 objects, starting with that decree, all the way up to 2021, that tell this story of Jews migrating, somewhat assimilating, maintaining an identity, being persecuted, and perhaps migrating again. And we think that this is such important. It's important for Jews. It's important to point out how long we've been around and living in these lands and other lands. But it also tells, as I alluded to earlier, a contemporary story about all types of people moving around, the 65 million migrants that are living in the world, and how they go to other countries and what it's like to try to be a part of that world, but also to maintain their identity. So quickly now to why this event. We are very fortunate, the Leo Baeck Institute, to have been funded to be one of the many projects that are associated with the Deutschlandjahr. This is a project put together by Germany, the German Foreign Ministry, from October 2018 until the end of this year, where they're holding events across the country revolving around business, industry, politics, education, and culture to highlight the transatlantic relationship. We're very thankful that the Foreign Ministry has done this, and the German Information Center is a part of that. And the Deputy Director of the German Information Center, Anke Popper, is going to speak at the end of the panel very briefly just to wish us well. And I thank her for coming, and I thank the German government so much for supporting these events, which we're doing in 9 cities. I won't bother to list the cities, but they're cities that are not New York, where we always do these things, and not Washington, D.C., but really across the country. In each city, we chose to link to the local talent, if you will. And of course, the American Jewish Archive is the local talent. And working with Gary, we designed a program where we could talk about women in the Rabbinate. It certainly has a German story, as you'll hear, as the first woman rabbi was from Germany. And also we have a young rabbi who was trained in Germany but now lives in the United States. So let me introduce them, and then the panel can begin. Rabbi Sally Priesand is America's first female rabbi, was ordained in June 1972 by the Hebrew Union College here in Cincinnati. From 1981 to 2006, she served as the rabbi of Monmouth Reform Temple and became the rabbi emerita upon her retirement. Rabbi Sonia K. Pills has a PhD also, where she earned that doctorate from the Department of Rabbinic Literature at Potsdam University. Her rabbinic ordination is from the Abraham Geiger College in Germany. And just as a side, Germany is an amazing place when it comes to Jews today. There are more than 200,000 Jews in Germany today. In 1932, there were 525,000 Jews. So, you know, there's a high proportion there, and very diverse, very welcoming. Of course, they have problems with anti-Semitism and with a right-wing party, but Germany is handling them as well, in my view, as any country in the world. So I would really love to have our panelists come up and have a discussion about our topic for tonight, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll cue you. I'll cue you. Okay, good. I think is that? Can you all hear all right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. How'd you like that for a very fast scene change? Change of scene. Okay. So this is going to be more conversational, and then at the end we hope to open it up for some questions from the audience, so you can be thinking in terms of that as we proceed. So I echo Dr. Weitzer's warm welcome to you. It's always great to have you here. Let me begin by asking both of you, Rabbi Prezant and Rabbi Pills, to, in your own way and however you so choose, to elaborate a little on how Dr. Weitzer introduced you, your own personal pathway to the rabbinate, and perhaps in this context and because of this program, Sonia, you could tell us a little about that pathway as it was unfolding in Germany and how that influenced your particular path. And this will give each of you a chance to let people know about the basic issues that influenced you and your upbringing and brought you to rabbinical school and wanting to become a rabbi. So I'm going to let the two of you decide who wants to go first.
And I will always ask you to go first.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure for me to come back to the Queen City. I love being in Cincinnati and seeing so many familiar faces around the room. I'm also pleased that I was present this evening when we honored the Rudermans, and we thank you for your vision and your generosity in bringing the American Jewish experience to Israel and building those important bridges. And I'm especially grateful because I know that the story of women in the rabbinate will be part of that American Jewish experience. So we thank you. And I'm grateful that we're having this opportunity to partner with the Leo Baeck Institute. It's interesting to me that Reform Judaism really began in Germany, and so we're going to hear some about that. And then Reform Judaism in America was here in Cincinnati. And so it seems really appropriate to me that we connect the two. Now, as far as my own story is concerned, I decided that I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 16 years old. That was back in 1962. And unfortunately, I don't remember why. I remember wanting to be a teacher, and whatever my favorite subject was is what I was going to teach. So one year I was going to be an English teacher, and one year a French teacher, and one year a math teacher. And in the end, I decided to be a teacher of Judaism, which of course is what a rabbi really is. Fortunately for me, my parents were very supportive. They said, if that's what you want to be, then you should do it. And they never implanted any doubts in my mind, and they gave me what I consider to be one of the greatest gifts that any parent can give to a child, and that is the courage to dare and to dream. So I didn't think very much about whether or not women could be rabbis. I knew that there were no women rabbis in America. I did not know the story of Regina Jonas from Germany. And I decided to apply to the College Institute. Now, I was in the last year of the undergraduate program, which was a joint program between the University of Cincinnati and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And it enabled students to skip the first year of the rabbinic program. So I was at UC doing my undergraduate work. I took some courses here, and then one day I went from being an undergraduate student to a second-year student in the rabbinic program, and everyone here sort of looked at each other and said, "She's still here." I will admit that many people thought that I came to marry a rabbi rather than be one. And I had been dating a fellow student for a long time, and someone went up to him and asked, when are you going to do the school a favor and get rid of her? So, today is very different than it was almost 5 decades ago. It's hard for me to believe that it's been that long. Another little nugget of information is that I'm probably the only student, maybe one of the only students, who never appeared before the admissions committee. It's a complicated story. I won't tell you about it, but it is the truth. And I was suddenly in the second year of the rabbinic program. Now, Dr. Nelson Glick was the president of the college at that time, and he is the man most responsible for the ordination of women as rabbis. He wanted to ordain a woman. I was in the right place at the right time, and he followed my progress. And I'm certain that he took care of a lot of little problems in the background that I never really even heard about. And he always used to make certain that I would be present on important occasions. Like he would, when the Board of Governors came, I was invited to do the service in the chapel. One time I remember being called out of class to go to the Board of Governors meeting to offer a prayer. So he wanted people to see me and to know that this was the direction in which the College Institute was headed. Unfortunately, he died the year before I was ordained. It was a great blow to me because, quite frankly, during difficult times, I always had in my mind the picture of how he was going to put his hands on my shoulders and I was going to be a rabbi. So that was very difficult, and fortunately for me and for the Jewish community, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, the next president of the College Institute, was in favor of ordaining a woman as well. It's only in recent years, however, that I have come to understand how difficult it was for him to step into the shoes of another person and fulfill the mission and dream of someone else. I was not aware at the time that there were people on the faculty who tried to stop my ordination, even though I had just 1 year left. So we're grateful to Dr. Gottschalk that he followed through on Dr. Glick's dream. Now, I think I'm probably going to stop here, but suffice it to say that I'm very happy to be here with Rabbi Pilz and to learn a little bit more about the Abraham Geiger College and her experience in Germany. And I will tell you that a few years ago, under Dr. Zola's leadership and with Lisa Frankel, several of us, rabbis, scholars, and lay people, went to Germany, and there are a few people here who were on that trip, went to Germany and followed in the footsteps of Regina Jonas. I knew the story of Regina Jonas, a little bit of the story, because Dr. Gutmann, when I was here, told me that he was at the Hochschule with her. But that was about all I knew, but I did tell her story very briefly in a book a very long time ago. And so it was a fascinating trip that we went on, and we got to go to the Abraham Geiger College and several things. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the insights that Rabbi Pilz will have to share with us on this evening.
Right. Thank you. So there is always a difference between the story you know and telling that one, and the story you don't know and telling that other one. So I can say what's true for you in your relationship to Regina Jonas was true for me in my relationship to you. I had no idea of your existence when I applied to rabbinical school, which, you know, speaks to the fact that we all live in little bubbles, Europeans too. Not only Israelis know nothing about American Judaism. I knew nothing before I moved here, which is ironic thinking about what I'm doing now, and I'll get to that later. I moved to Berlin in 2011 in order to become a rabbi, and at that point, there were 2 women rabbis working in Germany. I had met one of them who had already lost her job because she had fallen in love with a congregant and therefore had to give up her position. But good for me, she now was living in Switzerland, which was her home country, and she could teach me. So I had someone I know who at least had studied to become a rabbi, even though she wasn't working full-time anymore. Her name is Rabbi Bea Wieler. She studied here in New York City at the JTS, and then returned to Europe. One of the few women who returned back to Europe after finishing a rabbinical studies program somewhere else in the world. I came from a very small community, lots of expats, lots of Russian Jews. You're going to hear more about Russian Jews the more I'm talking. And when I moved to Berlin, I had an MA in Jewish studies. I had with a minor in Islamic studies and psychology. And I remember very clearly that the first paper I wrote in my major for Judaic studies was about Regina Jonas's rabbinical thesis. And I ripped it apart. I didn't like it, because what she did mainly was to argue that women are, by nature and definition, radically different from men. They're warmer, they're more caring, and therefore bring different qualities to the rabbinate that are very much needed and apt for the specific time that she was living in. She was making basically the argument that because women are more sensitive and warmer, they are better in teaching kids and pastoral care, and as the role of the rabbi was changing in that specific time frame, women are therefore better equipped to fill that new rabbinic role. I was very angry. I didn't think that the main contributions of women rabbis should be to change the rabbinate or do all the soft, nice things, whereas male rabbis would do the powerful study things. I wanted to study. I really generally wanted to study. So whatever I did, I think, was very much driven by, I thought rabbis that are students of Torah. I wanted to be a student of Torah. So I pursued that. But Regina Jonas became a role model in different ways. Not so much for the position she took on feminism or women in the rabbinate, but she became a role model in dignity and persistent. And I was very moved, I think 1 or 2 years ago, a children's book was written by one of our colleagues, Rabbi Sandri Sasso, Regina Persisted in the United States. And I translated that book for the daughter of one of my best friends in Germany because I wanted her to grow up with that. Was that model of a woman rabbi who persisted. And I think there were few women rabbis, maybe no women rabbis to this day, who had to persist through things that Regina Jonas, who died in a concentration camp, had to go through. So I think her heritage is incredibly complicated, and something to wrestle with, because it's really from a different century. And it will not respond to all our questions of today. Once I was in Berlin, and I'll stop there. No, stop me. Right, so once I was in Berlin, I met the second female rabbi, and then I met a third. I think by today, there are maybe 5 German-speaking rabbis. I obviously left. I think one of them, German is her first language. For the others, I'm no. Yeah, most of female rabbis in Europe now are born and raised in the former Soviet Union, which brings an entirely different cultural and linguistic and culinary and temperament-wise touch to European Judaism.
Well, all I wanted to quickly do, because there may be people here who have never heard of Regina Jonas, and all I want to say, because both Rabbi Pilz and Rabbi Priesen spoke about her, is just to briefly tell everybody that Regina Jonas was a woman who was studying at what we might call the liberal seminary that was sort of like a sister school to the Hebrew Union College in Berlin, and she completed her entire rabbinic program in 1930 and then was not ordained. In other words, what Sally was describing sort of happened to her. They didn't ordain her. But she later was privately ordained in 1935 as the German community was beginning to go into dissolution and they needed people. She then received ordination and served very heroically both in Germany and then when she was in Terezin, which is where she was sent, she continued to teach and to serve as a rabbi. And the last thing I'll say for everybody here is those who went on the trip know we got to see the remnants of her archives, which is located in the Centrum Judaicum in Berlin, the Jewish center. And I said to those people, you can't keep the originals there and not have a copy somewhere else, because if something were to happen to them, this history would be lost. So I'm proud to tell you that the only copy in North America exists here in the American Jewish Archives. And this is, if you'll move us forward, you heard Rabbi Pilz talk about her rabbinic thesis, which survived from 1930. Can a woman be a rabbi? And this is the cover page as well as the first page of the thesis. This is from 1930, as you see. And then if you go forward, Lisa, another document. There's many, but I just wanted to give you an illustration. This is from 1938. It just simply, you can sort of see that in honor of Shavuot, in 1938, she spoke in Berlin to what was a woman's sort of a woman's group of sort of a Zionist woman's group, and she spoke on in honor of Shavuot. And as you see, you can all see under in the middle of the page, she was referred to regularly in this period as Rabbiner Regina Jonas. And so both Rabbi Priesen and Rabbi Pilz have been speaking about her. To the best of our knowledge, she was the first woman in modern Jewish history to receive ordination. And she's become very heroic because of the very tragic and difficult life she lived. And then in 1944, she was deported from Terezin to Auschwitz, where upon her arrival she was murdered. So,
if I could just
yeah,
add,
please.
I made a note in the interest of time that one of the things when we went on the trip, I was quite shaken by the number of similarities between the life of Regina Jonas and my life. And so I just made a note. She did not see herself as a pioneer or a famous person. I just wanted to be a rabbi, and so did she. And both of us shared a similar definition of feminism. That is, all people should be given the opportunity to fulfill their God-given potential to the fullest. As you said, her mentor died the year before she was to be ordained, and the seminary refused to follow through. My mentor also died the year before I was ordained, but I was successful in still being ordained. I remember that I was always held to a higher standard, and so was she, and both she and I often heard the word patient. Be patient. It'll all work out. Be patient. She did not think that a female rabbi should marry and have children. It would just be too difficult. And ultimately, I came to the same decision, believing that I myself would never be able to do both and do them well. And so I chose my career over having a family. I don't have any regrets because I feel that all the children whose lives I've touched along the way are my children too. She loved to preach and teach. I also do. And I think you just briefly mentioned that we saw her papers before she was deported to Terezin. She gave her documents to the Berlin Jewish community for safekeeping. Had she not done so, we would know even less than we do now about her significant contributions to the Jewish community, and many of them that continue to bear fruit today. The papers were never discovered until the fall of the Berlin Wall. That is probably why you never heard her story. So we're just beginning to discover more about her. And, I never really understood that I was following in her footsteps when I said that I would donate all my papers to the American Jewish Archives, and that I would ask all female rabbis of whatever denomination to do the same, whether originals or not. In that way, historians who want to do research about women in the rabbinate can come here to the American Jewish Archives and find everything that they need.
It's interesting. I've heard Sally speak before about how some of her own religious school students didn't know any image of a rabbi other than Rabbi Prezan, and therefore they always just assumed that rabbis were women. But we've just heard quite some testimony from both of how difficult that is when there is no role model, and the fact that there are now in excess in the liberal movements of a third of the rabbis are women, that obviously is one obstacle that is being addressed today. There are more and more role models for younger people to see. This is interesting.
In my congregation, we had a female cantor too. So all the kids thought that only women did this. So I used to tell my congregants, please take your children to other synagogues so they can see that men can be rabbis and cantors too.
So, speaking about that, I'm wondering, and I think, with regard to the constraints of time, let's try to be targeted, but let's think of, what you might identify as popping to your mind as the most formidable obstacles once you began to study for the rabbinate. Obviously, Rabbi Prezan, you're going to go back many decades. You have a lot of experience to draw on. But Rabbi Pills, you too can focus on maybe in your education and in your student pulpits. Give us a taste, a feel, especially focusing on, again, Europe and Germany. We'll start with you. What were the obstacles that come to mind that were the most formidable?
I think my story is very different because I was only the third woman ordained at my school, but different from the stories we just referred to, I had the full support of my school and especially its director and president from the very beginning. I was able to do something that I could have never done here. I got my PhD while I went to rabbinical school, and I can honestly say the hardest challenge of them all was to do both at the same time. I went to school for only 4 years, for which I'm blessed. One of them I spent exclusively at a yeshiva in Israel. But I can honestly say that there were some friends I did not see for 4 years because I was either writing my PhD or working in a community, both in Switzerland and then in Germany and then in the United States. For the last 7 years, I've been working as a cantorial soloist for the High Holidays in Bethesda. So I've traveled a lot. I studied a lot. I worked a lot. And it has been a very different life experience. I was 27 when I moved to Berlin. I was 31 when I finished. So for these 4 years, I had basically dedicated my entire life to studying and research and writing and becoming a rabbi. And compared to these are very formative years in a person's life, I would say. They were very different from most of my friends. And I think that, just catching up with life after that intense period was over, that was a challenge. It was a challenge to get into that mode of doing nothing else but studying and writing, and it was a challenge to get out of it again.
Rabbi Priesen?
Well, I think I'm a very private person, and it was very hard for me to suddenly become so public. And in my days of here at the college, especially during my last year, Dr. Glick arranged for me to go around the country and speak in different places. And this was his way, I guess, of introducing the American Jewish community to the fact that there would be a female rabbi soon. And one of the things we should remember is that that was totally a decision of the College Institute. The union, the CCAR, they had nothing to do with it, and it was just the College Institute that decided we're going to have women rabbis. So what popped into my head now is when it came time to find a job, it was not easy. There were 35 men in my class. They all got jobs, and I was the only one who didn't have a job yet. And many congregations wanted me for my publicity value, so they could say, oh, they were the first. And then there were other congregations who wouldn't speak to me at all because I was a woman. And in the end, I think I got the best job of anyone in my class. The Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. I was the assistant rabbi, and it always seemed appropriate to me that I would go to a synagogue that had a reputation for equality and social justice. I only got that job really because everybody else had a job. And that's how it turned out. And I will say that Rabbi Edward Klein, the senior rabbi, taught me a lot about being a rabbi, the things that we don't always learn in rabbinic school about practical rabbinics. He loved being introduced as the first equal opportunities employer in the American Rabbinate. However, I stayed there for 7 years. And that was probably too long, but I was happy and I didn't really want to face what comes next. Rabbi Klein became ill and everything changed. Although I ran the synagogue for a year, I wanted to be considered to be the senior rabbi when he was ready to retire. I wasn't trying to push him out the door. I had been there, and the congregation would not hear of that at all. And I will tell you that the Free Synagogue has never yet had a woman as its senior rabbi. Had many women as their assistant associate rabbi. And it was really only in the last few years that I went back there once to speak. And I told them you weren't willing to take the risk. And, my theory is that the world moves forward every day because somebody is willing to take the risk. And I couldn't find another position, even though I had been at a major synagogue for 7 years. And so for 2 years, I was a part-time rabbi at Temple Bethel in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I just went there for the weekends. During the week, I was a chaplain at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City. And then I finally went to Monmouth Reformed Temple, where I was the rabbi for 25 years before I voluntarily retired, because I think that rabbis and a lot of other people should know when to leave. You should leave when they still like you. So I guess the point I want to make is because I was the first, I had to face all the problems that came along. And I was very angry about the Free Synagogue. And I wrote an article about my experience there and my experience with the Placement Commission, et cetera, and I took it to Rabbi Malcolm Stern, who was then the placement director, and he read it, and he said, you cannot publish this. I wanted to be in Reform Judaism magazine. He said, you cannot publish this. If you do, you will destroy your whole career. I said, but I will write it for you. And he sat down at his typewriter while I was sitting there, and he redid it and wrote it. And that's another reminder that in the beginning especially, female rabbis needed the support of male rabbis. And that still is true today, I think, especially when it comes to women moving up to the senior position. It's only in the last few years that large congregations have been accepting women as the senior rabbi.
I'd be interested in knowing, Sonia, you spoke about your own personal challenges and obstacles, but were women, as far as you said you were the third ordained by the Geiger College, women didn't experience any of these obstacles as far as you could discern, what in terms of positions, placement, in Europe?
It must sound quite shocking. I've thought a lot about this since I moved here. Jewish Europe is by definition, in its essence, much more Orthodox than the US. That is a very obvious, fact. So I knew going in that my world would be very, very small. It was very obvious that there might be, maybe 2 congregations that would consider hiring me. Lovely enough, one of them said to me in my second year, "Don't count on us, we don't have the money." And the other one made me a job offer. So I was really lucky. But I was even I'm twice blessed. Because I hadn't even finished my PhD when I was already, it was clear that I would also have an academic career. So I never tried to be a full-time congregational rabbi, which makes the story very, very different. And it would be much more similar to your story would I decide now to move back to Europe and become a congregational rabbi. Because just there aren't so many congregations who are open to female rabbis. The ones who are, they're lovely places. I'd be happy to work there. But there may be, 5 altogether It's a very small world. I think one of you already spoke about, you said it. The world changes when someone takes a risk. So I think I took my greatest risk, not when I entered rabbinical school. I took my greatest risk after I got ordained and I moved to the United States, which has, there are no other European female rabbis who have done that before me. And there was no one who could prepare me for my experience here. I was teaching full-time at the Hebrew Union College in New York City for 2 years. And then had to think about whether or not I wanted to stay. And by that time, it was very obvious to me that, had I to compare these two Jewish communities, the American Jewish community has one big, awful thing about it. It is way too far away from Israel. And that has a big impact on many, many aspects of Jewish American life, be it language-wise, be it culturally. I can honestly say my cultural shock moving from Europe to here was bigger than it has ever been, changing locations a number of times between Europe and Israel. It's very different here. I'm so glad to hear that there is a growing understanding of how different it is here. But I do remember encounters with Americans even, while still being in Israel. Like one American rabbi said to me once that he's very interested in studying exotic Judaisms, like European Judaism. And I looked at him and said, what are you talking about? We are Rashi. So this is a completely different, perspective on who we are and in whose in whose traces we are walking and what images we are, if you would ask me, like, what is my greatest role model, maybe I would have told you about the Rambam, right? But it was never, I think, a female rabbi in flesh and blood. Moving here, I think what I learned to appreciate so much specifically about the Reform movement was especially the incredible dedication to Jewish justice values. I think the American Reform movement brings something to the table that in all its history and political engagement and activism, that I don't think any other Jewish community in this world has that kind of spirit. And I deeply, deeply admire it. I now work for the Central Conference of American Rabbis. I'm doing this with all my heart. Ironically, I'm their editor. I'm doing my best. But it is mainly because of my dedication and my real belief that American Reform Judaism has something that is truly special and unique and important for the global landscape of what Judaism can be.
So I'm looking at the time, and I'm thinking maybe we ought to open it up to some of the questions you might have. I'm going to ask one last question, and you should frame any questions that you have now in your mind, and then I'll call on you, okay? So it gives you a few minutes to put them in your mind if you have any. I think that the last question I'll pose is, I read that in an article that was published recently, Blue Greenberg said that the inflow of female clergy, I'm quoting Blue Greenberg, has had a powerful effect on Jewish life across all denominations. And she identified two important influences that she identified. One was a sort of demographic, that by having female clergy, we double the pool of talent for the Jewish people. And the second is that, sort of addressing something you spoke about, she says that women clergy have modeled a kind of gender collegiality that has benefited the rabbinate and ultimately the Jewish people. Those were her two ideas. What do you think about, as you reflect on this issue of women in the rabbinate? What would you say, add anything to what Blue
Well,
wrote?
I think both of those are very important, but I would also consider leadership style. Now, when I was growing up, the rabbi was the authority, and it really didn't, matter that much what other people thought. You would go to the board meeting, the rabbi would say, "This is what we're going to do," and everyone would say, "Yes, Rabbi," and that would be the end of that. And I decided that I really wanted to have a partnership kind of leadership. And that was always very important to me. And I think that is something that women bring, the networking and just working together with other people. And when I was first interviewed for my position at Monmouth Reformed Temple, I told them, "I'm not coming here to be Jewish for you. Okay? I'm going to suggest ways in which we can all be Jewish together." And I served on every committee. I was part of the discussion. Sometimes I lost, and I would say, "Okay," and then in a few years I'd bring up the idea again. Partnership, that kind of partnership is very important. And I do think that women have brought that to the rabbinate. And in terms of study, one of the things that women have brought is new insights on how women respond to traditional texts. Okay? Women usually read these texts differently. And for all these years, we've never really heard about what women think of biblical stories, Talmudic stories, whatever. And I think that's very important. And I also feel that we should be so grateful to the women of Reform Judaism for publishing the Women's Torah Commentary. I really think that is a volume that adds so much to our text study groups, and I think it's important. And I also think that the insights of women have come about because the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion has welcomed respected female scholars to its faculty. That is something I fought for my entire rabbinate. And those of you who know me for the last 50 years know that when I was here, there were no women on the faculty. And I think we owe a great deal to David Ellenson, now the chancellor. By the way, he was my student assistant at the Free Synagogue for the High Holy Days. And Aaron Pankin, Alav Shalom. He was my bar mitzvah boy. He was a student in my religious school, and I think that's one of the reasons why he was so committed to having women participate. He didn't even think about it. I mean, that's how he grew up, and his sister is a rabbi in my community in New Jersey. So leadership style and insights with regard to study.
Yeah. I mean, I'm immensely blessed because I'm working at the new CCAR. I'm working with and for Rabbi Hara Person, who is the first woman ever to have this position. And it is a joy. Hara is steering the Women's Task Force for Women in the Rabbinate, which is most of all, I think, one of its greatest achievements, that it is a listening campaign. It gives a lot of space for women to reflect on their experiences in the rabbinates, to tell their stories. They're going to archive them all. And the wonderful thing about the American Jewish community is because it is so large and it is incredibly well organized, let me tell you, is that there's really a possibility to steer a shared conversation about all of these experiences and what they, what kind of an impact gender bias has on the day-to-day experiences of female rabbis. Experiences that may be so small that the individual woman is not even paying attention to them because we take them for granted. But if you gather all the stories and you realize that there are patterns, and as Rabbi Prieston said in a conversation before we even sat down here, she said, I cannot believe that we're still talking about the same things like we talked 50 years ago. And I think one of the maybe possibilities that we might one day be able to stop talking about these things is because the conversation has been broadened enough to bring everyone on the table and to have the men not run away. Because I think there's also something happening that, we could call the feminization of the rabbinate. And I think Rabbi Prieston already said it. What we really need to this day is the men to stick around. Don't leave the synagogue boards when you feel that there are too many women around. Don't refuse to work for the female senior rabbi. Come to the synagogue where there's only female clergy, even if it might be a little bit difficult, because if you're not going to come, this thing is going to fall apart. So I think that must be a very loud appeal at this time. As women grow stronger, if they're only perceived as frightening or disturbing or boring already because we're still having the same conversation, it's not going to work. So I think really what we need is strong men as partners.
Friends, yes.
I could just do one
Sure,
more thing.
of course.
I brought along this quotation from Regina Jonas that I think kind of sums up everything so well. It's part of what I read when we dedicated the plaque in Terezin to her memory. And this is what she said. I hope a time will come for all of us in which there will be no more questions on the subject of woman. For as long as there are questions, something is wrong. But if I must say what drove me as a woman to become a rabbi, two elements come to mind: my belief in the godly calling and my love for people. God has placed abilities and callings in our hearts without regard to gender. Thus, each of us has the duty, whether man or woman, to realize those gifts God has given. If you look at things this way, one takes woman and man for what they are, human beings. That was written back in the 30s. Wow. And ever since we went on our trip, I have been telling the story of Regina Jonas. I travel around the country, I tell my story, and I tell her story. And when we came back from our trip, we really wanted to make certain that she got her rightful place in the chain of tradition. And we decided that we wanted to have people of all denominations in the Jewish community say Kaddish for her on her yahrzeit. We had trouble determining exactly when that was, but with Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum in Washington, we discovered that she arrived at Auschwitz, her name is on the transport list, on Shabbat Bereshit, the very first Shabbat of our year. And we assumed that she was murdered that very day. And so we have asked all denominations around the world to say Kaddish for Regina Jonas. There's nobody to say Kaddish for her on Shabbat Bereshit. And I will tell you that in my synagogue this year I placed the plaques for my family, and I have one for her too, that says Rabbi Regina Jonas, Shabbat Bereshit. So I know in my synagogue she will always be remembered. And we invite you to do the same in your synagogues.
You know, I think that's just a great way to bring our program to an end. You know, I think it would be anticlimactic after that to go to questions. So, for those of you who were touched by that story, you can go now on the high holy days to your congregations and suggest that on Parashat Bereshit, which comes at the beginning of the year, that Rabbi Regina Jonas's name be read. If you need any help with that, you can be in touch with us. Ladies and gentlemen, before we ask Anka to join us and conclude our program, I hope you'll join me once again in thanking our guests for spending this evening with us. Here, you want to use this mic? Okay. Here. Wait, let's see if I can turn this on.
It's on. Sorry, I do not want to keep you from going home and to have a nice evening. I just wanted to thank you. I'm so impressed by your words, Rabbi Priest and Rabbi Pilz, and also from your words. I was very impressed, Shira and Shay. I do not want to say much more about that. And I'm very proud that this event today is part of our initiative of the German Embassy and the German government of the Wunderbar Together campaign, which wants to underline the relationship between Germany and the United States. And I think it's very important also to come back to the German Jewry and the roots of Jewry in the United States. One more personal word. I'm a German Jew. I came to the US for the first time in the beginning of 2000s. As you also mentioned, I knew only a very conservative Orthodox Jewry from Israel and from Germany. So one Shabbat in New York, I decided to go to the synagogue on Yom Shishi on Friday night. And by coincidence, I came to Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. I didn't know where I came from, and I have to tell you, I was shocked. I was really shocked. I saw women singing. I saw guitars, which I've never seen before in a German or an Israeli synagogue. So that opened my eyes to how the roots that began in Germany have developed here during the last century, and I'm so proud to have learned so much. And your work you are doing here is so important for Judaism. And I wish you, both of you, all the best. And also thank you, Shira and Shay, for the work you are doing. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to say bid you farewell. I want to just mention that on a week from Thursday, we have another program here. We'll try to send out notices, all of you registered. That program is also going to be very interesting. Thursday night, the 26th, we will have a scholar who has written about liberalism and Judaism. It's being co-sponsored by the American Jewish Archives and the University of Cincinnati's Political Science Department. And our new president, President Raphael, will be participating in that discussion by distance. So if you're free a week from Thursday and you'd like to attend that program, we welcome you. I want to thank all of you so much for attending, and I thank you, rabbis, for being with us.